Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today's video I'm going to go through something I've wanted to do for a long time and figured I'm actually going to document the process, and that is measuring out my 4-link rear suspension. So the goal here is we're going to take some bar lengths, some bar angles, we'll be able to enter them into a calculator and we'll be able to determine what the anti-squat percentage of the car is. Now on a 275 radial type of car, typically people want to run a certain amount of anti-squat, and what that does is it helps the rear end actually separate and plant the tire. Now there's a ton of theory in 4-link suspensions, and I'm not going to claim that I'm an expert on it, but today's video I'm just going to show you guys how we measure it, and we're going to figure out what the anti-squat percentage of this car is. The suspension is factory mounts on the body of the car. I've got a BMR drop bracket on the lower bar, and this car so far has been 142 60 foots, leaving at about 10 psi. So it's not the fastest Foxbody, of course, but the 60-foot time is pretty decent. So if you guys see my suspension settings, at least you'll know, hey, you know, if you're going like 160s, at least you know maybe this setup you could get to like a 140. There's a lot of things that come into play here. The car is a 355 rear gear. We're leaving off of a foot brake. But yeah, let's get to measuring this thing, and we can see where it comes out. Now, before we get into this too much, I just want to let you know, essentially the general process here of what we're going to do is we're going to measure the bars, we're going to measure the angles, and we're going to enter them into a calculator on baseline suspensions. And what that's going to do for us is it's going to tell us what our anti-squat percentage is, and that's going to tell us a lot about how the suspension is set up. Then we'll compare it to some videos of how the car launches and what it does, and we'll see if it all seems to make sense, and maybe we'll find some room for improvement. All right, and one more thing here, what the end goal is, we're going to use this baselinesuspensions.com, their instant center calculator, and what we're going to do is we're going to get a whole bunch of different measurements, which I'll show you what they are, and they'll tell us what the anti-squat value of the car is. This is something that would be very difficult to calculate by hand, so it's awesome that Baseline's gone out here and made this calculated for you. The end goal is, again, this anti-squat value. We can check what the different bar holes do, and then in the future we can try the different bar holes and have an idea of how the anti-squat affects the car. Alright, so typically what people do here is they will lie under the car and they will get measurements, but that makes a pretty bad video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the height essentially from the diff to the ground, and I'm going to set up a jack stand. I'm going to take my wheel off, and I'm going to make sure that height is exactly the same. And what that's going to do is that's going to duplicate the ride height of the car, but it's going to make it way easier for us to actually be able to measure the bars, and I'll be able to show you the angles of my bars in case you want to make yours look like mine. All right, so measuring from the ground up to the axle, you can see we're probably, I would say, about 10 1/4 inches. So the goal is, with the tire off, we want this wheel sitting up 10 1/4 inches. Couple quick things to note. You can look at my floor. It's sitting at about 0.3 degrees. So I can't even get this to perfectly level. But we're like, yeah, 0.3, 0.4 degrees. Now the beauty of this is that this doesn't actually matter, because all the bar angles are going to be measured in reference to this floor. So the relative angle between the two bars will be fine. But I mean, for all intents and purposes here, 0.4 degrees is not bad. We're pretty flat. One thing I did want to note, you do definitely want to do this on a flat surface. You don't want to do this on some really huge angle. And one more thing here, I'm just going to double check before I take the wheel off. We're sitting about 9.9 degrees bottom bar angle. So I'll double check on my jack stand that we're sitting at about 9.9 or 10, and then we'll measure the rest of the car. Okay, quick sanity check. 10 degrees on the bottom bar. And I'll show you what I've done. I've got essentially this little screw jack holding up the side of the car. This jack is just chilling. He's not really applying any pressure. But the idea, I don't trust this. I've hit this with an impact many times over the years, so rather be safe than sorry. But now you can see we've got everything kind of opened up in here, and we can more easily measure our bottom and top bars. So let's do that. All right, I will just show you my lovely drawing here quickly. So we've got the bottom bar, the top bar. There's some funny stuff with the lengths I'll talk about later, but measuring the car, let's just do it like this, okay? So this is the bottom bar axle height. So from the ground to the bolt on the bottom bar at the axle, then we do it at the body. Top bar, same thing. Height from the ground to the axle, and then height from the ground to the body here. And then we will measure the physical lengths. So the bottom bar length is very straightforward. The top bar length is more complicated because the body, this is a triangulated link, right? So it doesn't sit perfectly parallel to the side of the page. This bolt hole in reality is actually coming out of the page. So we just want that horizontal length. So I'll show you, my best guess at how to measure that. But yeah, let's get into the car and we'll actually start grabbing some of these measurements and it should make more sense. All right, so because this is a triangulated 4-link, these instant center calculators, what they actually want is the horizontal distance, okay? This goes in, so we can't actually just measure from bolt hole to bolt hole. What we have to do on the bottom bar is we'll measure from the center of this bolt. Essentially, we can just go to this face, just hold the tape measure kind of square to the car, and then we'll measure to the center of that bolt, and that's the horizontal distance we want. All right, so doing this, I see that we have a measurement here of about 17 inches. Now, this is a 1/2 inch bolt, and I'm on the outside of it, so we'll need to take a 1/4 inch off. So I would say this measurement is about 16 3/4. Okay, now let's have a look at the top bar. So as you can see, this top bar is on quite a wicked angle, okay? The distance that the calculator wants is the horizontal angle. So you kind of look at this from the side and you want the length from, this bolt to the other one, but along the kind of the center line axis of the car. So you don't just come over and measure from bolt hole to bolt hole. Okay, you have to measure it horizontally along the length of the car. It's a little tricky to do, but we'll get a good estimate here. Okay, this one, a little hard to see how I've got this tape, but I'm essentially holding it centered on the bolt. This is really hard to do in film, but let's say we're about 7.5 or 7 3/4 of an inch. Now, angle-wise, we are at about 0.5, 0.4 degrees. Yeah, wow. So yeah, on my picture here, I just will exaggerate the angle a little bit. So you can see I've shown this thing going really steep in this direction, but it's only 0.4 degrees, which actually kind of surprises me. I'm gonna be interested to see how the anti-squat and instant center plays out in this car. Okay, now to the easier ones, we find these different bolt heights. It's hard to show you in a video, but essentially the front bar at the body, you would measure like that. Back bar, back bar at the axle, you'd measure like this. You measure all the points and essentially the distance to the ground. All right, quick recap on what I came up with. So this bottom bar, the mounting point to the ground, that's 9 1/8 of an inch. At the axle, mounting point to the ground, that's 6 inches. The top link at the body to the ground, 15 3/8, and the top link at the axle to the ground, 15 1/4. Now, I mentioned some fancy geometry earlier, and we're actually not gonna have to do that because I just estimated these horizontal bar lengths by holding a tape measure. So that's not perfectly accurate, but really for the sake of this, I think it's gonna be good enough. Okay, next up, we need the camshaft height from the ground. Unfortunately, I have so much junk in this engine bay that this is gonna be hard to measure accurately. But I looked back at a photo with my front cover off, and I noticed this label, the 6-liter label, the very bottom corner down there, that is very close to the camshaft center line. So we will need to measure from the floor to the very bottom corner of that point to get the camshaft center line. All right, so here's how I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna measure from the floor up to the top of this standoff, and then I'm gonna put a set square over here, and I'm gonna measure down to that corner. So whatever this measurement is, I'll subtract the distance that I measured down, and that will be the camshaft centerline height, and I will tell you what that is soon. All right, so I measured from the floor up to this point here, and I got 26 1/8 of an inch. Then I put a set square on here, and I measured from the bottom of the set square down to the bottom, one sec here, down to the bottom corner of this 6-liter tag, and I got just over 6 inches. So essentially for this car, the camshaft centerline height is 20 inches. Now what's interesting is most of the calculators, they say to use like 18 inches for that. So Obviously my ride height is a little higher than the average car. Now, one more thing that we'll do for fun is we will measure. You can see we have 1, 2, 3 bolt holes for the lower control arm, and we have the stock height. So let's just take a look at those for a sec. Okay, so currently we're sitting at about 6 inches bottom height. Bottom bar can be about 6 inches. We could drop it down to as low as, I would say, 5.5, and we could go up to about 6.5, and the stock height is about, I would say, 8.5. Alrighty, so with everything measured up, you can go to Baseline Suspension's website. So this is baselinesuspensions.com/instant-center.php. And what I actually noticed here is this is a stock Foxbody, I believe. So you could enter in, you know, all of the stock car information, and, you know, this is what it'll give you. So what I've done is I've taken the information that I've measured and I've entered it all in. So I can just quickly run through the numbers with you, and we can just look and see how my car is a little different from the stock car. So you'll see this horizontal upper control arm length, that is essentially the same. And if we go and look at the lower control arm length, you know, they have 18 inches, we have 16.75. So for whatever reason, my lower control arm length seems to be a little bit shorter. And I think that has to do with the angle on the bar. We can take a look at the rear upper and the front upper holes. So they're like 17.5 and 16.5. So we've noticed my car, they're around, you know, 15.25, 15 3/8. So what that relates to is my ride height. So my car is lower than a stock Foxbody, which totally makes sense. Okay, we'll look at the rear lower control arm bolt height. I've got 6 inches and the front about 9. You can see factory, you're about 9 and 9.5. So the factory bar is very slightly uphill, but if you'll notice, it is much, you know, it sits quite a bit higher, the factory height, than what I've got, which, I mean, that makes sense. We measured that on the car. Now, if you look at where mine is, I've got like 6 inches on the rear lower and 9 inches on the front lower. So my bar is much steeper than a factory bar. Weight-wise, you put in your rear car weight and your front car weight. So what this comes from is you put your car on a scale. You can do this at your local racetrack. Most racetracks have a scale. You put just your front wheels on, you put just your rear wheels on. So the factory car is like 1800 front, 1200 rear. Mine, when I scaled it, I got about 1950 front and 1300 rear. So because of the roll cage and everything, my car is heavier than a factory car. And then we go center of gravity height, or camshaft height. We're at 20 inches camshaft height. The stock car is at 18, which this one to me seems a little peculiar, but I double checked my measurement. That's what I had. So you see the factory car here. If this is a factory car, they've got the instant center or the anti-squat value at about 111%. So we go to my car and we see that the anti-squat value is 149%. You'll notice the length is 54 inches on mine. The factory car, the length is about 52, and then the height on the factory car is about 10.5. My height's about 16. So let's put 2 and 2 together here. So based on what they're saying, my car has a little bit longer of an instant center and quite a bit higher of an instant center, right? So this is the factory car. You can see it's very close to the neutral line, and on my car it's higher than the neutral line. Now I won't go into the details of all these heights and measurements, but essentially what happens is the more anti-squat your car has, the more it will separate, and the closer to the center of gravity, I believe, the instant center is, the more the front of the car will pick up. All right, so with that being said, let's just take a look here at what my rear adjustments do to the anti-squat. So I noted that right now my car's in the 6-inch position for the for the bracket on the diff there for the bottom bar. So I can drop this down to 5.5. You'll see that increases the anti-squat value to 165%. And alternately, I can increase it to 6.5. That gives us 131%. Now, if you notice just the difference between the 6 and the 6.5, 6.5, my instant center is behind the center of gravity, or at 6 inches, sorry, the instant center is behind the center of gravity. 6.5, it's in front of the center of gravity. Now, if we go down to 5.5 inches here, so this is raising, or sorry, if we go up, I should say, to 6.5 inches by raising the bar. Oh, I guess that's where we were, sorry. So the highest setting in the BMR bracket gives you about 131% anti-squat. Now, let's say we went to the factory height, which I measured at about 8.25 inches for my car. It's going to give you like 47%. So this is slightly off because when you adjust the bottom bar height, the length of the bar changes a bit. But I think this gives you guys a good illustration that that simple BMR drop bracket there is essentially, I can easily change my instant center or my anti-squat percentage, from a minimum of 131% down to a maximum of 165%. So again, I'm not going to go into what this exactly does to your car, but essentially it's you can make pretty drastic changes on your suspension and how the car reacts just by dropping that bottom bar. And essentially, anti-squat is controlling how hard and how fast the car separates. Again, those theories, like, I'm not even totally sure of exactly how changing all of these items change the car. I've got enough knowledge to be dangerous, but I'm not an expert to be teaching you guys, about exactly what a higher anti-squat percentage and the difference in the center of gravity heights and things are. But I guess my purpose of this video was really just to show you guys it's not too hard to measure, and this gives you a baseline. And in layman's terms, say you go out there, you've got your bottom bar in the 5.5 inch hole, maybe it doesn't work worth it down. Okay, so you throw it in the 6.5 hole, you've gone from 165% anti-squat to 130%. Maybe the car works way better at 130% anti-squat. Then at least you're going in the right direction. And the nice thing about this calculator and the whole purpose of measuring this is for you to be able to log these things and write down this data and be able to look at your passes and say, hey, it worked really good at 130%. It didn't work good at 165%. Maybe you go back to the track and the track is extremely sticky, and you slow your shock settings down. You go back to 160% and it works better that day. I mean, the purpose of this is for you to be able to at least have some kind of a number to reference with when you're adjusting your bars, and you're not just blindly doing it. You don't just have some guy at the track telling you, hey, make that bar super steep, or hey, flatten that bar out, or try changing your tire pressure. Obviously, suspension tuning, there is so much to it, and I'm trying to learn it myself. But the nice thing about this set of tools and measuring is it's free. It doesn't cost you any money to do this, and it gives you a baseline of where you're at, what changes you made, how it affected the anti-squat percentage of the car, and if it helped. So as always, guys, I really appreciate you taking the time to check out my videos. My goal over the next couple of months here is to really master 4-link suspension adjustments and just learn how to get cars to launch better, how to make things work better. So where I'm at with mine right now, we're leaving at about 12 psi off the foot brake. We're going 142 60 foot on a 1600 foot DA day. So the goal here is get out on like a 400 foot DA day. Try to leave on 16 pounds, maybe 20 psi down the track, and hopefully get something like a 910 or a 920 out of the car. So that's kind of the reason I'm starting to look into this suspension stuff. Is right now I'm going 140s or 142 60 foot. I really need to be at closer to like a 130. So I know that once I start hitting the car with more power, yeah, it's going to get a lot more difficult to maintain traction. So that's why I want to start looking at these, these type of things like my 4-link bar settings to really have a comprehensive understanding of what anti-squat value works for the car, and essentially what doesn't work. Now, kind of the nice thing about the lack of adjustment with your factory mount Foxbody is all my adjustment really is on the car is this number here. It's that rear lower control arm bolt height. That's the only thing I can really change. I know a lot of people play with shock settings. My limited knowledge tells me that you need the bar angles right before you worry about shock settings and before you worry about taking a ton of power out of the car. I think that once you have the bar angles right, it will be much easier to kind of tune the launch on the car. I feel like if your bar angles are not correct, then trying to play with shock settings, I think it's kind of a bandage. Again, I'm not an expert on that, but the nice thing here is when we start testing and we start trying to get the car to go faster, all I'm adjusting is this one number here. I know exactly what my anti-squat value is, and I'll know it works. And when I find out, what's working really good or what isn't working, then I'll let you guys know. So I guess for your reference, currently, this is where I'm sitting, 149% anti-squat. And like I say, the instant center point here is quite high, which does probably explain to me why the car is essentially topping out the front shocks the whole time, even though the car is separating a bit, it's picking the front end way up, and that's because the instant center point is so close to the center of gravity and it's so high. It's using a lot of energy to lift the entire car up. So ideally, you want the amount of suspension movement possible to achieve a current, an ideal 60 foot. But yeah, like I say, as I learn more about this stuff, I'll let you guys know. But I hope this video helped you guys out today in at least determining how to measure your car. And if you don't want to measure your car, at least this is mine, with the BMR drop brackets, and you can see what it would be factory, and then you can make any decisions you'd like based off of that. So as always, guys, thanks for checking out the channel, and we will see you on the next one.